begin. Hello everyone, and welcome to this month's edition of the Canadian Transfusion Trials Group Research Methodology Lecture Series. And today it is our great pleasure to welcome Dr. Rena Buckstein, who will be presenting on issues regarding the assembly of your team when you're ready to start your trial. So Rena is a clinician investigator at the Odette Cancer Center at Sunnybrook Health Sciences who specializes in malignant hematology. She's an associate professor in the Department of Medicine at the University of Toronto, having completed her medical school training at Boston University and internal medicine and hematology specialty and subspecialty training in Toronto, followed by a fellowship in lymphoma and high-dose therapy at Sunnybrook Hospital. And she's also completed a diploma in clinical epidemiology. She chaired the hematology site group for 15 years and currently leads the hematology clinical trials program at the Odette Cancer Center. She has authored and co-authored 144 publications and holds peer-reviewed grants from the Canadian Cancer Society Research Institute, the Canadian Institute of Health Research, the Ontario Institute for Cancer Research, and the Leukemia Lymphoma Society of Canada, funding research into myelodysplastic syndromes and lymphoma, and she is a recipient of the LLSC UFCW Award for Leukemia Research in Canada. So it's our privilege to have her here. And Rena, the floor is yours if you want to take control and share some slides.
I will. Thank you very much for that kind introduction. There we go. And let me know if you can see my slides and that it's in presenter view.
Perfect. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining. I'm going to make this a very conversational presentation, and there's going to be lots of time for questions. I don't have that many slides. But over the course of the next 25 minutes or 30 minutes, I'm going to define what I consider is the research team, at least in my experience, and what the different roles are for each of the individuals of your research team. Explain how to manage your business relationships with industry partners, and talk about some of the pearls that I've gleaned for success, some of the pitfalls for failure, very painful lessons that I've learned over my career, and am I still learning, and sort of impart some key messages at the very end. So, when I talk about a research team, I do clinical research in lymphoma and MDS, and now leukemia at the Odette Cancer Center. The research is comprised of both in pharma-led trials where I'm the local PI, or my co-Is are local PIs. And then there's also investigator-initiated research. So you think up a research idea, get the funding, and initiate it either at your center or at your center and other centers who put patients on the trial. And then there's also cooperative group studies that we will either chair for the entire country or for many countries, or you're just the local PI for a cooperative group study. And in the case of Canada, would be the CTTG. So the research team that's important to me, that's relevant in the malignant hematology world at the Odette Cancer Center, includes the principal investigator and the co-investigators. So you would be the PI if you're running the trial or starting the trial, and then your other hematologists in your group that are going to put patients on the trial, even though you're the local PI, are your considered co-investigators, and they're put on the delegation of authority for the study. It's always helpful to have a research supervisor who's supervising your overall research group. Now, depending on the size of your group, your research supervisor may also be your CRA and data manager. But if you have a large enough group, and hematology does have a large group because, as you know, hematology is many different cancers. So and we have 10 hematologists at the Odette Cancer Center. So we have a big staff compared to some other sites. So it's always helpful to have a research supervisor to, well, we'll talk about his or her roles in a second, clinical research assistants, data managers, somebody to manage the regulatory aspects of the study, the REB applications, the OCREB applications in case of Ontario, for centralized trials, as well as keeping everyone up to date on the regulatory aspects of the study. There's lots of filing for amendments, protocol deviations, and all that kind of stuff. That's what the regulatory manager does. At the Odette Cancer Center, which is a big group of investigators in all the different malignant sites, we do have somebody who's been hired specifically to help develop the budget for a clinical trial, and supervise the payment and invoicing of, let's say, the pharma company or the cooperative group for payment for services rendered. If that doesn't exist in your group, your own staff may be responsible for doing that. But in big sites, there's often somebody who's dedicated and hired from the research aspect of things to develop the budget and supervise the budget and payments. Then there may be a lawyer that helps with the contract finalization that involves a lot of feedback back and forth between the lawyer and your clinical trial staff, as well as you, with regards to what you're agreeing on with regards to the budget, how many patients you're putting on, the timelines, commitment to adhering to the protocol, and so forth. And then if your study impacts other departments, and often they do, like in the case of pharma-led studies, the pharmacy, the main lab for incremental testing, the pathology lab for bone marrow review, flow cytometry, molecular testing, and even nursing, for example, for incremental pharmacokinetics, for example, or vital sign monitoring while they're on a particular study, they all have to sign off on your protocol as well. So I include them in the research team, even though they are not necessarily only uniquely assigned to your site group. So the PI has lots of responsibilities. They're the ones that will often be approached by industry partners to say, are you interested in opening this study? Or they may be the individual who conceives of a study and then approaches industry for funding for their investigator-initiated study. The PI, I have learned over the course of the last 15 to 20 years, basically is running a business. The clinical trials group that they are overseeing with the staff that they have is a business. And you have revenue and you've got expenses, and you have to make sure that your revenue matches your expenses, or preferably that you're actually in the black and not in the red. And that's a tough thing for a hematologist that has no business training, no financial statement experience, reading a financial statement experience, forecasting, and so forth. And so that's a challenge, and you kind of learn as you go. And I'm still learning. The PI is responsible for either reviewing the protocol that's provided by the CTTG or pharma, or writing the protocol, conceiving of the research idea and writing the protocol. It needs to be, of course, scientifically interesting to you and your group. It may offer your patients access to novel therapies that they may not have access to for years to come until the phase 3 study is resulted and then the regulatory agencies approve it. So if you're interested in this particular drug, or in your case, blood product or strategy, this may be the only way to access it. The PI is responsible for determining feasibility, meaning, do you have the patients that you can put on adequately to justify the cost of opening the study, because it's very expensive to open a study? Does it align with your site priorities? Meaning, is it out of left field, Or is it really aligning with, what you're hoping to do? It's more precision medicine, for example, or reducing toxicity or reducing resource use by, let's say, shortening chair time in the chemotherapy suite or the transfusion medicine suite. So is it aligning with your priorities? And then you need to make sure you have enough runtime, because it may be many months to even a year to get a study open. And by the time that study opens, you want to make sure that you have enough, number one, budget to keep it going, and two, enough patients to put on study. Especially for a pharma-led study, there may be all the slots are filled and there's 5 left, and you get to keep the study open for 2 months, and then it closes because accrual is completed. So you always have to be very careful about that. And I've learned the hard way. Sometimes it's a really fantastic study, but it takes so long to open, and it accrues like gangbusters everywhere else. And by the time you get it open, you have an opportunity to put 2 patients on, or even 1 patient on, and then the study closes. So you want to make sure there's enough run time. And then, of course, you want to make sure your budget is either going to meet expenses, or preferably your revenue is going to surpass your expenses. The PI, of course, has to get the buy-in from all co-investigators. You're not an island. You need them to put patients on the trial as well. So if they're kind of meh about the study idea, then don't, even if you're super excited about it, don't open the study, because it won't be successful. And you're also the one that's expected to sort of estimate how many patients you can put on per year. And I've learned from experience that we are overly optimistic. First of all, we have like this recall bias, and you think, oh, I just saw 3 patients like this in the last month. It's going to be super easy. I'm going to be able to put 30 patients on per year. Whatever number you think you're going to put on, divide that by 2 or even 3, because clinical trials have lots of inclusion and exclusion criteria that you think, oh, that's pretty broad. I have lots of patients like this, but then you get down into the nitty gritty, and the creatinine clearance has to be 35 ml per minute, and your patient's creatinine clearance is 33 ml per minute. They're not going to be eligible. There's no leeway, especially if this is a pharma-led study or an industry-led study. So lots of things will trip you up, or the patients don't want to travel, or the patients don't have the resources to come for the frequency of the testing that's required. There's lots of things will trip up patient accrual. So whatever you think it's going to be, divide it by at least 2. The PI is responsible for the REB application, and of course introduces the study to the patient and has to sell the study. You are the saleswoman or salesman that has to be enthusiastic and excited about the study to excite your patients to want to go on the study. And it's like selling a car. You have to sell a trial for patients, because there's a lot of inertia out there, and there's a lot of patients today that are very suspicious of healthcare. And so you got to earn their trust and get them on board. The other responsibilities that you're going to have is that you're going to be responsible for expeditiously reporting on the adverse events, causality, and relationship to the study drugs with your research staff. And you need to know all the GCP principles. So there's training that's required. There's lots of modules you'll have to go through to understand good clinical practice principles. Understand about your responsibilities with regards to delegation of authority to your staff, your co-investigators. You need to be very timely about reporting any trial updates to your co-investigators and to the patients if the consent form has been modified in any way. And your patients, of course, will have to be reconsented. And you are basically responsible for all aspects of the study. And there's like increasing responsibilities for principal investigators by Health Canada and the FDA, particularly if you're the sponsor. So if this is investigator-initiated research, and I think in transfusion medicine, more of it's going to be investigator-initiated, you have a lot of responsibilities. The buck stops with you. So it's important that you know what they are. And if this is a multi-center trial, you have to really understand the regulatory responsibilities that come with that as well. The auditing, the protocol modifications, the contract negotiations, the contract modifications, the budgets, all that stuff, it stops with you. You're also going to be managing your business relationships with either industry, the cooperative group studies that you may be involved with. I imagine there's the same for transfusion medicine cooperative groups, your granting agencies. So if you get a grant to run the study, you're responsible for giving yearly updates and progress reports. And then your relationships with your colleagues, constantly sending out emails to advertise the trial, encourage enrollment. People forget that your trial is open. And then you'll learn, 3 months into the trial that 5 patients were missed because they forgot about it. So immediate, just like you have a recall bias of how many patients you could put on, you have a recall bias for what trial is open. And so make sure you're advertising to your physician colleagues about the trial being open and the inclusion/exclusion criteria. Don't assume because you know it like the back of your hand that they're going to remember that. And then it's always helpful to as the PI to what's the word, earn good favor with the hospital administration that's going to help you enact the study. So for example, if you're running a transfusion medicine trial and you need your transfusion medicine nurses to do greater documentation, even potentially help with accrual by identifying the patients that could be eligible, you want to be in their good graces and communicate well with them, thank them profusely, include them potentially even in co-authorship on the study so that they feel like they're your partner on the study, not just hired help. And that will also improve the success of your study. And then you're also, as the PI, especially if you're doing investigator-initiated research, you're writing grants to fund your studies. And so that's going to occupy your time, but always keep your radar out for easy research funding opportunities, especially hospital-led or university-led research opportunities. So the research supervisor. So our site group is large enough that we actually have somebody who oversees my group. So she's my number 2 in the group, and she does the bulk of the work with regards to management of the clinical trial staff, finance, negotiation, and so forth. So she's going to coordinate the clinical trial agreement between you and whether or not that's CTTG, the cooperative group, or the pharma study, the pharma-led study. And it might be directly with pharma, or it might be with a contract research organization that's been hired. He or she will review the protocol and identify all incremental testing above and beyond normal standard of care. And that's because the hospital demands that you reimburse them for anything incremental over standard of care. So that may be certain labs done at a frequency that's not normally done, the cost of shipping labs for central review, the patient-reported outcome completion, which is not standard of care, pregnancy tests, ECGs, chest x-rays, and so forth. And also any incremental visits part of the study that would be above standard of care have to be reimbursed and has to identify that for the budget creation. So he or she will estimate the time commitment of clinical research assistance so that can be built into the budget. Will liaise with the PI to ensure that there is a patient population and will establish the rate of accrual. Now, often you can draw off your previous experience. So if you're testing in the same population, let's say it's a leukemia population that's newly diagnosed below the age of 60 who has a specific mutation, you can use your databases to sort of establish that. Or if you ran a trial in the similar patient population, you can see, okay, how well did we do? How many patients did we put on over the course of a year? And that helps, again, with estimating rate of accrual. And that's important because you're getting paid per patient. And if you're not going to put enough patients on, the cost may exceed revenue. This research supervisor will also delegate a member of your team to be the direct clinical research assistants and or data manager, or both, if they fulfill both duties, and will liaise with the hospital departments for the protocol review and funding approval. Often these things happen simultaneously. So once the trial has been reviewed, the industry partner has approved you as a potential site. Then the work begins with regards to sending it out for the contract negotiation, budget creation, and sending it out for impact review by all the different departments, as well as the REB application. And there's in some hospitals that has to happen sequentially, which of course extends the runtime to activation. In other cases, some of these things can happen simultaneously, and that's a more ideal situation. The other thing is the research supervisor will liaise with you to decide, okay, we have 8 trials in our activation queue. Which is the one we should what's the order with which we should activate them? Because they often can't be activated simultaneously, at least in my hospital, where there's limited staff in pharmacy to come to the investigator activation meeting. There's limited staff to review clinical trials. And so you have to prioritize the trials. So if you have a really interesting trial that's only going to put 1 patient on, and then that's older in the queue, but then you have this trial that's just landed on your lap for which you can put 10 patients on pretty quickly, and that's going to be very revenue generating, you may end up prioritizing the newer trial over the older trial for that reason. And again, I've learned from bad experiences where if everything was egalitarian, it's like, okay, we're going to do it in the order in which it was submitted. That's not a recipe for success. You have to be strategic about which trials you're going to open, because you want to put as many patients on that trial to justify opening it. You may get audited by regulatory agencies, either the FDA or Health Canada, for the trial that you open. So the research supervisor is supervising the staff to ensure that you're adhering to the protocol, that you're doing good documentation of training and maintaining shadow charts and adhering to protocols, so that when the audit comes, it's as painless as possible. It's always a painful experience to go through an audit, but as long you just don't want to be caught with non-adherence, gross mismanagement or non-adherence, poor consenting documentation, all that sort of thing. So the research supervisor has to be super conscientious about that. Okay. The CRA, the real workhorse, is also responsible for reviewing the protocol and developing the schedule for patient visits and testing to know how to book the patients appropriately and book the tests appropriately in the right timelines that adhere to the protocol guidelines, plus or minus 48 hours. They have to have a bone marrow, or they have to get their treatment. Their time from consent to treatment has to be X period of time. They're the ones that ensure adherence to these timelines. They also create the case report forms and source documents with shadow charts, so that you always can prove that you were adhering to protocol and that you were maintaining the data. They're also going to be the first point in contact for the patient after you've approached your patient and offered them participation in the study. They are usually the ones that will consent the patients. They will fill out the adverse events and serious adverse events with the sponsor and the REB. And they will work with you for implementing the study. If it's a drug trial, there's often drug kit numbers You see the patient in clinic, the patient's good to go. You fill out the physical examination, make sure their labs are appropriate for treatment, and then there may be a drug kit assigned centrally that's sent to them from the CRO that then the physician has to then enter in the chemotherapy order and so forth. And then notify the departments that they're good to go. So there's lots of little picayune steps involved for the CRA. Also, they're the first point in contact for your patients. The patients are going to call them with problems that some of them they can troubleshoot. In other cases, they'll involve you. And they will ensure that there's good local documentation of all research efforts done by the PI and that's adherent to the trial. They will also be the person that the CRO, the contract research organization, if that's the one who's running the trial, will approach to say you're missing data on this and this and this and this, and then they will go back and complete those fields in the electronic database. The data manager may be the CRA or maybe an individual, a different person, depending on the size of your group. They are the ones that will help support the CRA. They often will do the specimen processing and shipping. So if there's bone marrows or peripheral blood testing that needs to go off centrally, they will do that. They may be the people that are approaching your patients for patient-reported outcome completion using electronic tablets. More and more trials aren't using paper, but they're using electronic tablets for PROs. They'll maintain a central lab supply inventory. So the tubes, the samples that are sent to that need to be done as part of the study may be sent by the CRO dedicated to this particular study. So they maintain that supply. And they also may be the ones who take what's printed on a case report form and enter it into the electronic case report form. Sometimes it's the CRA who does that directly, but sometimes it's the data manager that does that for them, especially if the CRA is super busy with patients in clinic all day long. They also will help with study activation and maintenance. Make sure that the study documents that are up to date, the consent forms are up to date, and that the right study staff are giving the right forms to the patients, that they're not giving them a consent form that's 6 months out of date. And they will also maintain training documentation so that everyone who's on the delegation log has been appropriately trained on the protocol. And sometimes we hire a data manager who then over the course of the year becomes a clinical research assistant. So that's a good way of, number one, I'll talk about retention and pitfalls, but keeping your staff stimulated and challenged is a way of encouraging retention. And so someone starting as a data manager straight out of university may morph into a clinical research assistant. Then we have a regulatory person in our hematology site group. Not all site groups do that. In some cases, the data manager functions also as the regulatory person. They have to be familiar with all the REB processes, whether or not it's a central REB or a provincial REB. In the case of Ontario, OCREB, they will submit for the REB approval. They'll maintain the annual REB approval. They'll ensure that the sponsors' consent forms are updated to match the REB requirements. They submit all protocol revisions to local REBs or central REBs. They also will maintain the conflict of interests of all the PIs, that they are up to date. And all these trials now are entered on clinicaltrials.gov, so they'll maintain these trials and update them as appropriate. And if the study gets published, that's also put on the clinicaltrials.gov database. So what are steps for hiring and retention? So I've learned over the time that your team has to function effectively, and for that to work, they have to like each other and respect each other. And it's really helpful if you're interviewing for a new position to actually get the input of your team members. So they may participate in the interviewing and the decision making. It shouldn't just be you or one other person doing the hiring. It's you're more successful if you involve them. That's what I've learned in the interviewing and decision. And they may actually identify areas of concern that you may not have picked up on. And so that is one pearl I would impart is involve your team in the hiring process. Be very clear about the goals of your position. So if someone's coming on, make sure they understand the nitty-gritty of their job. Don't make lofty promises and so forth. They need to understand that this is a very time-consuming and precise, precise, almost a job that requires anal retentive qualities, meaning this person has to be extremely accurate. And that's sometimes really tedious, right? It can be, and filling out case report forms, electronic case report forms is a very tedious procedure. It's time consuming. And so you want to make sure they understand that's going to be in their job, because you don't want to hire somebody who then realizes it's not for them after spending 3 months training them. So be very clear about what's involved on that particular position. Also, if you're hiring straight out of university, and you may realize that this is the case, you may, and you're hoping this person's going to stay with you for a long period of time because you're going to invest the time in training them. It might be 6 months till they're ready, really ready to fly on their own. Is this just a 1-year stepping stone to a medical school application? And that's important to know. And that might be fine. You may only need somebody for 1 year, and that's okay. And this is going to benefit you and benefit them. It's going to be looking good on their CV. But understand that if you're hiring a Bachelor of Science person straight out of university, they may be doing this as a stepping stone. So keep that in mind, especially if you're hoping the person's going to stay 5 years and they may only stay 1 year or a year and a half. Also, don't ignore your gut instincts. So I've learned this as well. You can be fooled by hiring somebody who's worked in other research groups, let's say has 5 or 7 years of research experience elsewhere. And on paper looks fantastic, but in the end ends up being a major personality challenge, a difficult person to work with, and it doesn't work out for you. So you don't have to only hire someone with experience in research. It's great if you can, but it's not a necessity. I've learned that if you hire the person with the right qualities and that even without significant research experience, they can be very, very successful. So always check the references thoroughly, not just about research, not about their work, but also about their personality and how they work in groups, because this is a group dynamic. They're not working on their own. They're working with other people and they have to be compatible. And what I've learned is if you look at the university transcripts, this is just my own bias or experiences. If they have a very high GPA, it means that they're fastidious and hardworking people and they care about detail. And those are the qualities you want the most, is attention to detail and hardworking. So if they get great grades, at a reputable university, and in tough courses, because many of these are people who have done bachelors of science, then that might be a good fit for you. And then again, fit within your work culture. And that's where it comes to checking your references and also including your team in the interviewing to see, do they like them? Do they seem like they're going to be a good fit? If you want to keep them, you want to create a positive work environment. So that involves, number one, not penalizing them for mistakes, as well, and actually sort of appreciating when they do report errors that they've made, because that means they're being honest. And also rewarding them for achievements that they've made. So if they put a lot of patients on in a short period of time, or if, let's say, the CRO writes to you and says, this person's been a pleasure to work with, they completed their work in a very, very excellent way without making mistakes or correcting the errors easily and quickly. We're very, very receptive to my emails and quick turnaround. Make sure you circulate that to the rest of your group so they understand that these are achievements to strive for. Um, the major challenge I face as a head of the hematology clinical trials group is that industry pays more. And so it's not uncommon that you bring someone on, you train them, they become a fantastic member of your team, and they work with you for 3 or 4 years. They garner a lot of experience in the hematology world and clinical trials. And then they get lured away by industry. The CRO offers them twice what you're paying them, and they can work from home, and there's travel involved and so forth. And so it's a reality of our job, and there's nothing you can do about it other than hope that they love their work enough to stay, even if they're going to be remunerated less. And you also can work towards improving their remuneration by bonuses. So another thing I've learned is if you inspire your staff about their work, meaning they put patients on trials, the patients are flourishing, their disease is melting away, their disease goes into remission, they're feeling better, the patients appreciate them, and you appreciate your staff, as well as point out to them, look what you've done. You've offered this experimental treatment to this patient, and you've made their life so much better. The same motivation that keeps us working in hematology, because it's a challenging disease, but the successes of treating these patients will often be a drug for your staff and keep them there, even if they're going to be remunerated less than in pharma. So make sure that they're inspired about their work. And then continually challenge your staff with new tasks and job descriptions. Don't let them be static, a data manager for their entire career. Offer them opportunities to start seeing patients, to start activating studies, and so forth. And then again, when possible, especially for investigator-initiated research, offer them co-authorship. So what are pitfalls? Poor communication. So I also encourage all my co-investigators to be very communicative with the research assistants that are in clinic with them and seeing the patients with them. Appreciate them, praise them, point out where mistakes are made, but in a non-punitive way, so that they're able to learn and not be intimidated. And you need to have standing meetings with your staff and your research supervisor to understand the challenges and improve communication and realign your goals. Recognize that trials are complicated. There are so many steps to hospital activation. There are so many difficulties with REB requirements and data queries and so forth. And again, anticipate that so that it doesn't just turn you off from the research. If you anticipate it, it's not as bad as if you just kind of throw your hands up and say, I can't do this anymore. I don't want to do this anymore. It's like anticipating pain from a procedure. If you anticipate it, it's not as bad as experiencing it for the first time. And then inadequate education. Make sure you educate and empower your staff. Give them opportunities to come to meetings, pay for them to come to scientific meetings, let them go to travel to investigator meetings. Sometimes the CRO will offer exotic travel, even though they're going to be missing a few days of work. They love that opportunity. And I've had that this year where a number of my staff were able to go. One went to Rio, another one went to Miami. and they feel excited about their jobs. Um, and then the pitfalls, and these are a reality that you can't get by, is thefts by industry. Um, so again, you're going to have it. It's going to be inevitable. And there may also be thefts by other
Oh,
clinical trial
that's
groups
so
within
weird
your
because like
hospital.
here in my
Sorry?
Sorry, Judy, if you could, thanks you. That's
Okay. There may be your other clinical trials groups that are going to steal your staff, or other hospital clinical trial groups that are going to steal your staff. There's really nothing you can do about it other than, um, again, by continually meeting with your staff and seeing if they're happy and making sure that they're adequately remunerated. The only way to sort of keep them staying with you is to try to anticipate those needs. But despite that, this is going to be a reality of your job, and you're going to be constantly hiring and retraining new people, new crops of people. It's very rare to have someone stay for 20 years in your site group. They're going to be moving around. And then personality conflicts. Um, it's going to happen. There's going to be egos, there's going to be gossip, there's going to be other site groups gossiping about your staff, or your staff gossiping about other staff. It's no different than any other workplace. So trying to manage them, anticipate them, nip them in the bud when they start to occur, is an important thing. So there is definitely a human resource aspect of things that you have to manage. And then other pitfalls are loss of funding. The pharma company, you spent all this time activating a study. It took 6 months of your time, a lot of your research staff's time, and then the pharma company unexpectedly says, we're closing the study. And you've invested all this time and money, and the study's not going to continue. So that's a pitfall that there's nothing you can do about that. Also, unexpected increased costs. You try to pass that on to the pharma company if that's going to happen. Radiology has suddenly increased the cost of CTs. The lab medicine has increased the cost of bone marrow review or processing. You try to pass that on, which means renegotiating budgets. But sometimes if this is an investigator-initiated lean study with just a grant funding the study, that's going to be something you can't do anything about. And then budget deficits or inadequate billing. So the problem with these trials, at least the ones that I'm involved with, is as the data gets entered, you get automatic payment, but in other instances, you actually have to bill the pharma company for work done. Not everything is automatically remunerated. And if you don't bill them, you don't get paid. So sometimes we find that we estimated X number of dollars per patient, but the number of dollars that are actually in our bank account is less than we should have. And that's because we've been inadequately billing. And that's something to anticipate and try to be on top of. We have finance tracker that our trial staff have to enter every time they've done a bone marrow or done a patient assessment or done a CRF. There's supposed to be billing attached to that, but if they don't enter it into finance tracker, it's not captured. So it's as if the work wasn't done and you don't get paid for it. And that's a pitfall for potential, being in the red. If you have a sponsor that hires a CRO versus a sponsor leading the study themselves, like they have their own in-house CRO, having a CRO makes it more difficult and increases your timeline and complexity. I can't tell you how many times the timelines, because you send them the contract for negotiation, you review it, you make modifications, you send it back to them, and then it's a month or 6 weeks, and only badgering them over and over and over again to come back to you with more revisions to the contract. So it's very important to be proactive and naggy about these contracts because they can take a long time. And then what they tell you they want you to do in terms of, let's say, the data has to be entered within 48 hours, but you know it's not going to be possible to get it in 48 hours. You need to be able to push back and say, no, 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 it's going to be 72, or it's going to be 72 hours or 7 days until the data is entered. So again, be careful about what's in the contract for timelines that demanded by the CRO versus what's realistic in actual practice. We always underestimate time commitments. So if you're negotiating a budget, always try to increase the time commitment. It's always going to be more than you think. We always overestimate recruitment. So coming back to divide whatever number you think it's going to be by 2. And we always underestimate the timing to activation. So ensure that if you think the study is going to open in 6 months, but it's going to take you 9 months, make sure that you have enough time left to put adequate patients on the study in order to justify opening the study in the first place. And then again, as I said before, remember your staff may leave you for greener pastures, and you may be short-staffed, which may limit your ability to put more patients on the study and or the timelines for getting the data in, and so that you can get paid. So just to summarize, clinical trials have become much more complicated in the last 20 years because the data is much more complex. Regulations are much more, they're just much more complex and difficult to follow. Research opportunities in hospital regulated research are sought after, especially in oncology. So pharma wants you to do their trials, but for you to be successful, you need to hire the right staff who are going to want to work hard, that have self-motivation, and are interested in growing their knowledge base. You want to encourage a very positive work culture and growth for your staff, and repeatedly show appreciation for their work and point out to them the clinical implications of their work so that they feel like a physician does, the gratification of making a patient better, that they're not just hired help and cogs in a wheel, but they're actually the people that are directly impacting patient care, and that makes them feel, improves their job satisfaction. Training doesn't finish in 3 months. It's an ongoing iterative process, and continue to empower and challenge your team, and make sure you point out opportunities for learning in every clinical trial. And their staff will, they'll learn as they go. They'll learn how to grade toxicities faster. They'll learn how to recognize what are the important symptoms to report or not. Go to bat for your staff. So if your staff are having difficulties with other departments, go to bat for them. Speak to the department manager to try to unruffle feathers and improve communication so that your study can get open. And I've learned also from experience where we think we're understaffed and our efficiency is poor, and we hire more staff, that does not necessarily improve efficiency. So you want to hire staff that can multitask and are willing to work hard. Just think about how many patients you're capable of seeing in your clinic per day, or the number of tasks you can complete in a day. You can hire staff that are like you. And then remunerate competitively. There are often opportunities. In Sunnybrook, there's a pay schedule that you have to adhere to for various different titles, but we also have the leeway and flexibility to provide bonuses to improve retention at our own discretion. And then again, just encourage people to speak up when mistakes are made. Don't be punitive about it. Learn from the mistakes. And don't let the job become monotonous for your staff. Make sure they're constantly being challenged and acquiring new skills that will make them want to stay. And finally, be realistic about study accrual and costs. You're always going to put fewer patients on, and it's always going to cost more than you think. And I think I will stop there and take any questions or comments, and any other experiences people have that they want to transmit that I didn't cover?
I'll just start by saying, Rena, yeah, you really understood the assignment with this talk. This is exactly the kind of discussion we needed to have. I sometimes wonder, like, I mean, this maybe should have even gone first in the series because this is so important. Um, I think it's I was sort of thinking to myself, the analogies that our speakers make to the kind of work that they do with the sort of the headset you have to get into is always so interesting, and sometimes skills that we deliberately don't select for when you're applying to medical school. Like David Karkudi mentioned that trying to apply for a grant is kind of like trying to ask somebody out on a date, and your comparison of running a clinical trial like running a small business, I think, is really apt. My question for you would be, because again, we're sort of trying to gear this series really for sort of new young investigators, early career people who don't necessarily have a lot of money to work with to hire a large staff. Um, what would your advice be to, a research group that might have one research coordinator on staff with them? you know, would this be the time that you sort of that's when you go for that medical student who is going to work their ass off and just, they might not last, but they could do a lot of work? Or do you try to restrict the kind of trials you do to do only observational studies? What kind of guidance would you give somebody like who's just starting out in terms of getting a research group put together?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so certainly, it depends on the scope of the research that you're doing. Clearly, you can get a nice observational study done with the help of just a medical student or a co-op student. We regularly hire co-op students from U of T or from um, Waterloo, uh, who, you're paying them essentially minimum wage or just a little bit above minimum wage. They're really motivated to do work and they want to get a publication because they're hoping to apply to medical school and or graduate school and whatever. And so that's not that expensive to hire those people and to get an observational study done, a chart review, or even just like a survey of patients, a prospective survey of patients that's not of a drug intervention or a transfusion medicine intervention. That can be a very cost-effective way of getting research done. With regards to kind of like if you wanted to do a prospective interventional study, um, that's you're going to need to get obviously applying for a grant to do that, but often they're going to require you to have some kind of experience having run these trials or have some kind of preliminary evidence. So you may want to do just a small pilot study that then allows you to go on and get a bigger grant. So 10 patients, 20 patients, just to prove feasibility. But in that case, you as the investigator will have to be doing some of the work assigned to the tasks that I talked about in my talk, meaning you may be all of those roles with regards to um, applying for the government for clinical trial agreement with to get an investigational new drug in case you're doing a transfusional intervention study of a novel blood product, for example. You're going to have to play all those roles. And it's not that some staff can't do that, but it's not going to leave you a lot of time to do your day-to-day work. So my recommendation would be you can sometimes hire out staff from other site groups, especially, for example, some site groups may have a lot of staff and they're at a bit of a lull and they're not that busy. You may sometimes be able to hire staff either to work during working hours or in some instances after hours or on weekends if they're willing to do so, as long as you're paying them to help you with those aspects. And we've done that before where you kind of borrow staff who want to earn more money and are willing to work, let's say, one evening a week or one Saturday per month or two Saturdays per month to help with that aspect. So that's one possibility. But If you really want to do a proper interventional study, you're going to need the staff that I mentioned. At a minimum, uh, a data manager, at a minimum, a data manager who's capable of doing study activation and regulatory submissions and so forth. But it's going to be hard for you to take on all those tasks. It's yeah. As a clinician investigator, I would not have the time to do all the delegate the time that's necessary to activate a study. But for small retrospective reviews or even prospective and survey studies, definitely it's very cost effective to hire either a co-op student or a medical student um, to do the work with you.
Okay, thank you. I think got Andrew had his hand up and then Jeannie.
Hi, Rena. Excellent talk. I'm Andrew, I'm one of the transfusion docs over in Hamilton, supposedly a mid-career investigator, although I'm in denial about that. So maybe just a question, and I don't know if this happens often, this happens in the hem-onc world, but every so often you've got industry players that essentially play in the same space, right? So when you go to your industry partners, have you had any success in terms of getting industry partners in the same space, a space to basically play along in the same project and then maybe also weaken their individual influence in a project? Or do you carve it out in such a way that sponsor A goes for project A, sponsor B goes for project B? I'm wondering if you've had any approaches one way or the other around getting different sponsors to work on the same project.
You mean two different sponsors to participate in the same project?
Correct.
Yeah. Um, yes, like if you mean in the case of me for drugs, let's say I want two drugs on my study, and one is from company A and the other drug is from company B. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, well, maybe even outside of clinical trials, like if you're trying to fund like maybe an observational study as an example, right? And you're trying to get funding from different people. If you ask different industry partners to kind of participate in the same project, and hopefully maybe making it a little bit more investigator driven, since each of them will presumably have less influence, maybe not so much in the clinical trial space, but even in the observational space.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So a perfect example would be the MDS registry. We maintain a national MDS registry of over 1,400 patients in 15 sites across Canada. And we have pharma funding from more than one company. Over the course of its existence, we probably had funding from three different companies. And they're grants that are unrestricted. So their interest in supporting you may not just be altruistic. For example, they may want you to eventually help them interrogate for real world outcome data of their drug in this patient population, but that's not the reason for them funding you the study. And so, yes, right now the MDS registry has funding from both BMS and Taiho. We previously had Takeda. And I'm trying to get AbbVie to also support it. And so they're not that wasn't a difficult thing. And in fact, for those kinds of observational studies, often they don't want to be the sole funder. They want other people to help. They don't want to be the only one funding it. So yes, I definitely think it's possible to get more than one company involved, and they may all have different slants on what they want, right? Some may want the PRO data, some might want the survival data or the toxicity data and so forth. So they have different motivations for funding you, but they're not really directly competing with one another, right? So yes, I think it's definitely possible. And then for interventional trials, yes, I've gotten funding from two different companies to fund two different drugs. And sometimes it's in the context of CTEP, like through the clinical trial evaluative program of NCI, where more than one drug is provided as part of a clinical trial. It's sort of unrestricted provision of drug. But yeah,
Thank you.
it's doable.
And we will have a whole other session just on funding coming up later this year. We're just a little over time here, but Jeannie, if you could, you have your question.
I just wondered if there are like any really good courses you've sent your, coordinators to like grant writing, or is there any course that you found, okay, this is so good, it was so helpful? I think it's really important that we grow like the next generation of research coordinators so that we all have better people.
So yeah, I've never, I definitely think, I think the people with bachelors of science that come and work as your research coordinators may be able to help you with grant writing, but there's no particular course that I've sent them to for grant writing. I think it's a great idea, Jeannie. And the university often offers that, and meetings sometimes offer that as well. Like ASH, I think, offers that, or how to get your paper published, those kinds of symposia that are offered at ASH or ASCO and so forth would be a good way of teaching them how to help you. Again, it depends on the scientific ambitions of your staff. I'm thinking of one particular person that we had hired who had ambitions to get her master's in her PhD in psychology ultimately, but wanted to work for a number of years to raise the money in order to pay for her program. And she regularly took the initiative to write our newsletters, do statistics on our database and circulate them, and frequently helped with some of the papers that we submitted with regards to the scientific methods and used and so forth. But she just had the skill set. She was a scientific researcher and she liked that. But I think you definitely can cultivate it. And I think you just have to choose the right people who you hire. And if you see that they have those aspirations, you can definitely train them. There's definitely courses that are offered. They don't have to pay for these courses for how to write a grant. There's online symposia, I think, that are probably pre-recorded as well. So that might be one method. But no, I have never actually used my clinical trials for grant writing, but I think it's an untapped possibility. And it may also be a summer student that could do it for you, right? You could hire a summer student to help with the grant writing, do the literature review and so forth. And you probably help with the methods and so forth. I've definitely hired medical residents who have helped me write protocols. In fact, the one I've just opened right now, which is a wearable, the Aura study in MDS study that we just opened, she helped me write it, develop the case report forms, and she was just initially an internal medicine resident and then became a hematology resident. So you can use them as well. Smart people are capable of anything. So the bottom line is smart, ambitious, hardworking, and they can do anything essentially, especially if you show appreciation and give them co-authorship and recognition.
Fantastic. All right, we're just a little over time now, so I think we should probably wrap it up there. Rita, thank you again for that talk. So helpful. I hope we can get you to come back next year to give the same talk again, because I think it's there's lots of discussion we need to have around this topic. But with that, I guess we'll wrap it up. So we have our next session in April is going to be on retaining the patient perspective in your protocol design and study execution. Okay, thanks everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks, Jacob. Bye.